Well, I would like to just take a few moments to talk about what's happening. In 2007, okay, some of you may remember that I gave a talk here on the life of Thomas Paine, the famous English journalist who helped to inspire both the American and the French revolutions. And I stood exactly in this spot in 18th century costume. Some of you may remember that. Now, Tom Paine took a very dim view of the monarchy. He referred to George III as the royal brute of Britain. Tracing the English crown back to William the Conqueror, he argued that the antiquity of the English monarchy will not bear scrutiny. He lampooned William as a French bastard landing with armed bandits and establishing himself King of England against the consent of the natives. Of more worth is one honest man to society than all the crowned ruffians who ever lived. To the evil of monarchy, he complained, we have added that of hereditary succession. The first is a degradation and a lessening of ourselves, and the second is an insult and an imposition upon posterity. No one by birth could have a right to set up his own family in perpetual preference to all others forever. Hereditary succession puts monarchy in the most ridiculous light by presenting it as an office which any child or idiot may fill. It requires some talents to be a common mechanic, but to be king requires only the animal figure of a man, a sort of breathing automaton. This sort of superstition may last a few years more, but it cannot long resist the awakened reason and interest of man. So Tom Paine wrote this in his book, most of that in his book, Rights of Man, published over 200 years ago. Well, here we are, and Charles III has just ascended the throne of England. And I think Tom Paine would be appalled. But I think that we can afford to be a little more generous than Tom Paine. Many humanists will have Republican sympathies along with Paine, and I can understand that. But let's take a look at hereditary succession. You succeeded your parents by sheer accident of birth, not by any innate talents that you may have, and your parents were determined by genetic lottery, not by any democratic process. Well, you may think this is a silly analogy, but at the heart of our nation, we've got a family, a soap opera, if you prefer, and there's something very human, or even humanist, about that. The monarch stands above politics, or at least that's what we have come to expect, and the Prime Minister of the day has to seek their counsel every week. I think this system has certain advantages over the French and American systems, to say nothing of Russia, China, and other authoritarian states. In short, I think we can pay our respects to Queen Elizabeth and her family and wish Charles well in his new role as king. Well, our speakers today are Simon Whipple and Barney Maunder-Taylor. Simon is a member of our committee and organiser of our events programme, and Barney is a mathematician and juggler. I don't know if he's going to do any juggling today, maybe not. They are going to talk to us about inexplicable phenomena, so will you please give them a resounding welcome.
Oh, do you want to make a start?
I'm not, no, but I've got a loud enough voice anyway. But unless anyone at the back can't hear me, Steve?
You will have to use a mic, Simon,
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, hello. The subject of this afternoon's... Is it not working?
Just hold it up.
Is it off?
Is that better?
Yes.
Good, right, okay. Subject of this afternoon's talk is about how we should react if we see or hear of something which we can't explain it, which it seems really weird.
Excuse me.
Oh, does that mean I get rid of this?
No, it's fine.
Okay, right. And essentially, I am going to propose various unusual phenomena, and my friend Barney is going to try and explain them. As we go on, I think the phenomena will become harder and harder for Barney to explain. So we're probably going to leave you with the puzzle at the end of it as to whether there are inexplicable phenomena. What this is really about is to ensure that we pursue an appropriate inquiry, and being humanists, we are very curious about everything we see in the world, and to see whether we can make sense of the world. We're going to ask you to get involved quite heavily, talking to your neighbours as we pose various questions. But let's give some philosophical background to this. And we start with that renowned Scottish philosopher, David Hume. Now, David Hume really was a polymath in his philosophical undertakings and a brilliant man. Among his lesser-known pieces of work was his essay on miracles. And I don't know why it is, but I've quoted this to my two sons, who have both turned out to be evangelical Christians. So perhaps it didn't work with them. David Hume, you may remember, is the man who says that we know that the sun is going to rise tomorrow just because it rose yesterday and every other day in the past. And that's something along the same lines, that he believes it is really all a matter of probability. This is a key quote which I'll let you read yourself from Hume's essay on miracles.
Simon, if you could read.
I will read it, yes. David Hume says, "When anyone tells me that he saw a dead man restored to life, I immediately consider with myself whether it be more probable that this person should either deceive or be deceived, or that the fact which he relates should really have happened." It's a probability. If somebody says, or it's written in a 2,000-year-old book, that some guy rose from the dead, well, is the book a fairy tale? Did the people who went to see the tomb rolled open really deceive themselves? Were they deceived? Or is it more likely that he really did rise from the dead? Well, I first read this when I was an undergraduate many, many years ago, and it struck me then, the difficulty with this is that you actually need to put numbers on it. If you're saying it's more likely, well, you can only make sense of that if you have a mathematician to whom you will put the numbers. And here is the mathematician. Barney is a first-class mathematician, and he will attempt to show that, basically, that David Hume is correct.
Well, that remains to be seen. Thank you, Simon. I'm going to put this a slightly different way. I'm going to be appealing to Occam's razor, which is a principle that some of you may know, which says, other things being equal, simpler explanations are generally better than more complex ones. That paraphrases what David Hume said, and it's used every day by scientists to decide, well, we've got something going on here, which is more likely, this phenomenon or that one. And with that, I will pass you back to Simon, who's going to give you the first of 3 warm-up poses for you to decide whether they're genuine phenomena or not.
Yes, there are 3 poses, extraordinary questions, and here's the first one. Tall people are more likely to catch COVID. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to think about that and talk to your neighbour about it. Then when you, and perhaps we'll have a show of hands after a couple of seconds. Okay, counting from now for 10 seconds. Talk to your neighbours to think about this. Is it true that tall people are more likely to catch COVID?
Well, that's a bit harsh, isn't it? Should we give them 20 or 30 seconds? let's give them half a minute. Because they're going to need to discuss.
Yes.
Should we give them let's give them 30 seconds.
Okay, right. 30 seconds is actually coming up now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay then, I think we've had our 10 or 30 seconds. So hands up if you agree tall people are more likely to catch COVID. Is this true? Okay, we've got a few truths. Who thinks it's false that tall people are more likely? Okay, I can now reveal the answer, and the answer is well done if you said it's true. It is true that if you are tall, this is only a phenomenon for men over 6 foot, so women, you're off the hook, don't worry if you're a tall woman. But it is true that tall men over 6 foot are twice as likely to catch COVID as those under 6 foot, and it was a reputable study of 2,000 people. So hands up if you said it was false. Okay, well you were also correct, because another study showed that short people are at greater risk, so you were correct as well. Well done. In fact, there was another study done in America that also found that short people are more likely to catch COVID. So it seems likely to me that the original study made what we call a type 1 error. There are 2 ways that our tests can go wrong. One of them is a type 1 error. This is where the evidence seems to suggest that a phenomenon is real, where actually the statistical evidence just happened by chance. So a study of 2,000 people sounds like quite a large study, but it's a fairly small sample size, so it looks likely that actually there's not enough evidence. So I'm going to conclude that there is not enough evidence that tall people are more likely to catch COVID. Okay. Number 2.
Right, well that was the easy one. Let's move on to a much more controversial one. Black people are more likely to catch COVID.
Please discuss. You have 30 seconds. Ooh, controversial. Oh, you already know this one. How are we doing? Is that up? Okay, folks, you've had your 30 seconds. Who thinks it's true? Who thinks it's not true? Oh, okay, lots of truth. So it sounds like some of you have heard this one before. This was widely reported near the start of the COVID pandemic, and it seems to be true that black people are twice as likely to catch coronavirus. This time, the study was of 18 million people. So this is a much higher sample size, and having a very high sample size reduces both types of possible error. A type 1 error, which is where the evidence suggests there's a phenomenon but there isn't, and also a type 2 error where there is a phenomenon but the evidence doesn't pick it up. So we can have pretty high confidence that this does seem to be true. So I would say there is significant evidence to suggest that black people are more likely to catch COVID. Let's just quickly talk about the evidence ladder here. We're a little higher up the evidence ladder this time. So at the bottom, the most basic evidence that barely counts at all is what we call anecdotal evidence. You can think of this as, I know someone who. So perhaps, I know someone who's 6'6" and he's caught COVID 3 times. I mean, that's anecdotal evidence. It just happened once. But now we've got higher up the ladder, we've got statistically significant evidence that is unlikely to have happened by chance. Right, shall we move on? Number 3.
We certainly can, yes. Now, I should give you some context here. The photograph is of Barney's father with his 5 sons, and there are no daughters, or so Barney assures me. So, is Barney's father more likely to father boys than girls? Yes or no? Assuming that he's actually going to father a few more children, and I imagine that Mrs. Barney or Barney's mum might have a view on that. But leaving that aside, is Barney's father more likely to father boys than girls? You have 30 seconds to come up with the answer, starting now.
here, and you're holding it down there.
Ah.
It's better to try and get
Yeah,
it
sure.
forward.
Okay, I just forget.
Okay.
This is something else, is it?
That's for the for the video.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, folks, your 30 seconds is up. So, and I'm really looking forward to the answer to this, because there are some very accomplished mathematicians near the back of this room. You know who you are, and they were in great debates during the last 30 seconds. So, who thinks it's true? The fact that he's had 5 boys and no girls, is this good evidence that he's more likely to father boys than girls? Who thinks yes, it is good evidence? Okay, and who thinks no, it isn't good evidence? Oh, a fairly 50-50 split. Well, okay, I'm really excited now because we've had to take someone else's word for it until now. But at this moment, we can actually do the maths ourselves. So we're now going to play a game of what are the odds? Yay! Woo! So we've seen something that looks really bizarre. So he's had 5 boys and no girls. You might say, what are the odds? Well, let's find out what the odds are. Okay, so first of all, my dad had my brother Nick. It's 50-50, so a half. Where did I get the 50-50 from? Well, we've got to write down our hypotheses first. There are 2 possibilities here. The alternative, what shall I do? Actually, let me talk you through the whole test first, and then we'll do it. So first of all, you write down your hypotheses. Then you collect your data. We've already done that. He had 5 boys. Then you ask yourself, what are the odds? We call this the p-value, which we're about to work out. And then if this is sufficiently unlikely, and we have to have some sort of benchmark to compare it to, then we say this could not have happened by chance. It must be because he's predestined to have boys. So the odds we're about to calculate, that's called the p-value. Then we're going to determine that with our line in the sand, which is, I don't know, how unlikely do we want this to be before we proclaim it a thing? Should we say 5% maybe? That's typically used in statistics. It's a bit arbitrary, but let's say if it's less than 5%, it's not down to chance. And then you have the result of the test. So, let's do this. The null hypothesis is that my dad is equally likely to father a boy or a girl. It's just coincidence he's had 5 boys. Whereas the alternative is that he's more likely to have fathered a boy. All right, so let's do the maths. So first of all, he has my brother. That's a 50% chance of being a boy. Then it was me, so another 50%. And then my brother Alex, another half. And then Harry, and then Ross. So if you multiply those all together, the chance of him having 5 boys on the trot is only 1 in 32, which is roughly 3%. That's really unlikely to have happened by chance. It's less than our cutoff point. It's less than 5%, and therefore we throw out the null hypothesis and we conclude that yes, he is more likely to have to father boys rather than girls. You might have spotted a problem with this, though. I don't think we did it right, because we're supposed to write down our hypotheses first and then collect the data. We've done this in the wrong order. We've gone out into the world and find someone who's got 5 boys, and then we've tried to run a statistical test. This is a bit like collecting a load of data and then looking for patterns. If you look for patterns in the data, you're probably going to find some. So let's see where this erroneous method has gone wrong. We would have been equally surprised if he'd had 5 girls on the trot. We would still be having this conversation. So it's not 1 in 32, it's 1 over 16, which now falls the wrong side of our 5% cutoff. In fact, we may have been equally surprised if he'd had boy, girl, boy, girl, boy. We might have said, oh, he's predetermined to alternate. So actually, I have a new answer to this one. There is not enough evidence that he is predestined to have boys. We messed it up because we collected the data and then wrote our hypotheses. The only way to tell for sure is to make him go and have another 5 children and to observe what sex they are. But I asked him and he said no. What are you going to do? Right. All yours, Simon.
Thank you, Barney. Well, that was dealing with the easy questions. We've got a bigger one now. We've got 3 bigger ones, and I am so sorry that there are plenty of other big questions we simply won't have time to deal with this afternoon, but certainly in the Q&A, if someone has a bigger uncertainty, please wave your hand very strongly, firmly, to try and get your uncertainty considered by our tame mathematician. Let's look at the first one then. I'm sure you're all aware of the Shroud of Turin, which is a linen cloth, which, as you see, you can quite clearly see. I think it's even more clear on... Oh no, it's very clear on this one. Can everybody see the image of the face of Jesus?
Yeah.
Yes, good. Right. And you can even see his hands crossed over about where his groin would be. Everyone see that? Yes, good. Well, that is clearly Christ's burial cloth. I don't recall in any of the Bible stories I read when I was at primary school, they wrapped him in a cloth, but who knows? Clearly they did. They must have, because there it is. It's hanging on the wall of Turin Cathedral. So there we are. I think it's up to Barney to say, my hypothesis is that this is Christ's burial cloth. It has an image of him. Obviously that got imprinted from his body. So Barney, prove me wrong, if you can.
It's very compelling, isn't it? I mean, this is this ancient cloth, and there's quite clearly the image of a person there. Although, actually, Simon's tried to pull the wool all over our eyes, because this is a digitally enhanced image. It's actually a negative, so white and black have been swapped. This is the original one. Although I have to confess, it still looks pretty persuasive. I can see a face there with long hair and a beard, and then maybe these are wings here and possibly a halo on the top. It does look rather like the image of Jesus. So how are we to respond to that? I just want to talk about these hands. You can all see, you can pick out individual fingers of his hands crossed, but I'm not sure what these things are doing, because I can see more crisscrosses here, and on his chest and down here I can sort of see these stripes up here. So if we're supposed to believe that these are hands, I'm not sure what the rest of it is, and I'm also not quite sure what to make if we're having to explain away faces. What do we make of this guy here and this guy here, which are clearly clowns?
No, they're not. I think they're puffins.
Simon thinks they're puffins.
Yes,
I think they're more like
evidence that puffins were in the Holy Land.
Well, I want to start with Occam's razor, which is this principle of, can we find a simpler explanation from this? One possible explanation is that it's Jesus' burial cloth, but another one is that we're all suffering from pareidolia here. So pareidolia is the psychological phenomenon whereby humans tend to see faces in inanimate objects. And I was just preparing the slides for this talk a few weeks ago, and rather wonderfully, my friend Sam put this on Facebook. She says, Hula Hoop, her dog, was 16 on Tuesday, and look, tonight I immortalised her in my cup of coffee. Look at that. It's quite clearly Hula Hoop. And you may also be one of these people who looks into the clouds and sees a face, or maybe you've looked into your cheese on toast and seen the Virgin Mary. So this is quite a widely reported phenomenon, pareidolia. And I'd argue that we've evolved to experience pareidolia. It's very useful to us. Think back to our hunter-gatherer days and imagine you're walking along the road and you see what could be a face lurking in the undergrowth, waiting to pounce out and attack you. Now, if it turns out you're wrong, then you might feel a bit foolish, but apart from that, you haven't really lost anything. But if it turns out that you're right and this is an attacker waiting to jump out at you, spotting the face in the undergrowth could be life-saving. So it's a very sensible phenomenon for us to exist.
Barney, I'd just like to come in here.
Yeah.
With this Occam's razor business, now you say we should prefer the simpler explanation. Now you've come up with this incredibly elaborate thing about a human instinct that you'll see dogs in your coffee and things like that. Whereas I've got a very simple explanation. It was Jesus' burial cloth. Now why are you saying that pareidolia is simpler than Jesus' burial cloth?
Well, because it's funny, but I'll come back to that later. That was only a little teaser. So, all right then, let's do this properly. We'll do the maths. The null hypothesis is that there's nothing going on. It's not Jesus' burial shroud. Whereas Simon's alternative is that it is Jesus' burial shroud. All right, so we've written down our hypotheses. Let's play what are the odds? Unfortunately, as a mathematician, I can't calculate the odds. What are the odds of the image of a person by chance appearing on a cloth? I don't really have a way of doing it. So instead, I'm going to introduce you to the Sceptics checklist, for which I thank my good friend Simon Whitlock over there, who ran Bournemouth Sceptics in the pub for many years. And I've prepared a Sceptics checklist. When you see some phenomenon that looks incredible, I would encourage you to just pause and go, and the is as follows. The E stands for evidence. What is the evidence that this is Jesus' burial shroud? The R stands for replicable. If this is a genuine phenomenon, we should be able to see it repeated elsewhere. The M stands for mechanism. I'm a lot more likely to believe in a phenomenon if you can tell me why it's happened. For instance, if we go back to the 1940s, you might have told me smoking causes cancer. And I would probably have said, don't be ridiculous. Everyone knows smoking is good for you. But then if you can turn around and say, well, actually, there's chemicals in the cigarette smoke that damage your DNA and that also make it harder for the body to repair the damage to the DNA, then you've given me a mechanism and suddenly it's a lot more believable. At the end of the checklist, the dots stands for Occam's razor, which is, let's see if there's a simpler explanation. So I'll take up your challenge, Mr. Whipple. Let's go through those one at a time. So, firstly, what's the evidence? Well, there is a distinct lack of historical records of this. The first possible historical record of this Turin shroud is in 1353. But the first confirmed one was in 1390, where the shroud was denounced as a fake in a letter from a bishop to the French anti-pope, who was a sort of rival pope at the time. And apparently he'd already interviewed the artist, and the artist had confessed it was a fake. Right, the Gospels of Luke and John both mention that Jesus was wrapped in strips of cloth, not in one whole cloth. So if this is Jesus' burial shroud, then Luke and John were both wrong, and far be it for me or anyone else in this room to question anything in the Bible. My third objection to the evidence is that in 1980, some radiocarbon dating was done on the Turin shroud. What were the results? It's dated between 1260 and 1390. So the evidence is not looking great. Let's go on to R. Is it replicable? Well, surely if when Jesus touches something, his image gets imprinted on that thing, should we not be able to find other relics that Jesus has touched and which bear his image? And none other have appeared, so it doesn't seem replicable. It seems anecdotal. It's just happened once, so I'm less likely to believe it. M is the mechanism, and it seems to me that we're... Oh, could you grab that, because my laptop is about to die because I didn't plug it in, so I'm going to get a power lead.
Right, well, I was going to say just talk among yourselves.
Here we go.
But I think the technology is working by the grace of God.
That goes there.
You need an extension.
There we go. We're back.
Three.
We're back. We're back. Sorry about that. Right, the mechanism. So Simon doesn't seem to be able to explain how the image of Jesus was transferred to the cloth. So just by wrapping him in the cloth, because he's Jesus, the image is transferred. I would like a mechanism. I would like you to explain how it's transferred. And also, I want you to explain where the clowns come from, or the puffins.
Well, quite simple, Barney. The puffins were buried with him. And, I don't want to get too personal, but I have had to deal with a decayed human body, and yes, all sorts of things do come off that body.
Okay, we have a mechanism.
Yes.
Apparently, when you wrap a corpse in a cloth, things are transferred. So we have a possible mechanism, but why is it Jesus? Just because he's got long hair and a beard? Is it not a simpler explanation that it's someone else who was wrapped in a cloth? Or maybe that it was just someone's artwork, someone decided to draw an image of someone on a cloth. Or perhaps we're all just suffering from confirmation bias, which is another well-known psychological phenomenon whereby as humans we tend to ignore any evidence that refutes our beliefs, and we tend to hone in on the evidence that confirms our belief. So suppose you're a Christian in this newly emerging religion, and you're really desperate for Christ to have been buried and then risen from the dead. You might look at this cloth and think, aha, now we have evidence. You see, I told you it was true. But for me, the main thing is this first one. The evidence is not compelling. So I would say not enough evidence, but I will remain open-minded, not cynical. If you can provide more evidence, I'll happily look at it again.
Well, Barney, there is clearly evidence, because there are so many pieces of the true cross that have been found that you could probably build a ship from them. So, I mean, clearly that's the evidence that there's lots of it, it's replicable. There's lots of other bits of the true cross around. So, yeah, clearly, I rest my case.
Okay, I don't find it convincing.
Dear me. Mathematicians, they're so sceptical. Anyway, let's find something that you might find easier to actually prove to us. Now, here we have four of the top Olympians of the British Olympic scene, and I'm sure you recognise them. I'm afraid I'm not a great sportsman, so I have to read the list to say who they are. And I should say these are 4 of the top 10 Olympians by numbers of medals gained ever for Britain. Now, the thing about these 4, and the first one is a man called Mo Farah, except he's now got a different name, I can't...
Let me find it.
Hussein Abdi Kahin.
Yes.
And Chris Hoy, Jason Kenny on the left, and Stephen Redgrave. Now, what those men share, apart from being 4 of the 10 British top Olympians, is that they all have the same birthday, the 23rd of March. So the hypothesis is that if you want your child to become a top Olympian, arrange for him or her to be born on the 23rd of March. But I also have a more serious hypothesis that there is a benefit in being born in the spring. Obvious benefits, really. The days are longer, the plants are growing better, the food is more plentiful. So clearly that's the mechanism. So the hypothesis and the mechanism are there, and it's replicable because we got 4 of them. So over to you, Barney.
Thank you, Simon. Is anyone born on March 23rd? Oh, come on. No? How about March 22nd? March 21st? You're all too busy out training for the next Olympics. That's why there's no one here. So I love this one. This is just nuts, isn't it? 4 of our top 10 Olympic medalists that Team GB has ever produced, all born on the same day. What are the odds? Of course, we're going to find out. The Sun has taken this one step further, and they said, if you're planning to have a baby, aim for March 23rd. Brilliant. We can do this mathematically. Come on, people, we can do this together. So let's write down our hypotheses. The null hypothesis is this is a coincidence, an absolutely giant, enormous coincidence. This seems really difficult to explain away. What exactly is the alternative hypothesis, though? What is it that we're suggesting? I've written down 3 possible alternative hypotheses. One of them is, as the Sun claims, if you're born on March 23rd, you are more likely to be an Olympic medalist. Could be that one. I can think of a much simpler alternative hypothesis. It's been staring us in the face all this time. The zodiac and the astrology, they're all Sagittarius or what is it on March 23rd? Aries, thank you. They're all Aries, they're all born on March 23rd. It's in the stars, they were predestined So this actually seems really strong anecdotal evidence that astrologers were right all the time. But I'm going to propose a slightly diluted third one, which is that Olympic medalists from the same country are more likely to have shared birthdays than you would expect in a randomly chosen group of people. This is subtly different to number one. Number one says it's got to be March 23rd, whereas number 3 says it doesn't matter, but they've got to be from the same country. Okay, it's time to play. What are the odds? Okay, let's figure it out. The first way I tried to figure out the odds was just by doing a simulation on Excel. There are lots of tiny details. What I did is I took 10 people and I randomly assigned them a number between 1 and 365 to represent their birthday. And then I asked the computer to count the maximum group of people within those 10 that shared a birthday, to see if we could get 4 people sharing a birthday by chance. And I did it 100,000 times, and occasionally I got 3 people sharing a birthday, but it only happened about 0.5% of the time, and I didn't once get 4 people sharing a birthday. So this is pretty impressive. This seems to be a really rare event, very unlikely to happen by chance. But I was intrigued and eventually figured out how to do the maths as well. So let's work out what the odds are of them all being born on March 23rd. So first of all, we've got Stephen Redgrave, who's the oldest of the 4. There's a 1 chance in 365 that he will be born. The next one is Chris Hoy. For him to be born on March 23rd is also 1 out of 365. Then we have Mo Farah. That's 1 out of 365 as well. And finally, the youngest of the quartet is Jason Kenny. He would have to be born on March 23rd as well. If you multiply those together, the odds of this happening are about 1 in 18 billion. That's how unlikely this is. Pretty impressive. It does not look like there's any way we can explain this away using maths. It's far too unlikely. Much less than our 5% cutoff or any reasonable cutoff. But I think we can chip away at this a little bit, because there's nothing special about March 23rd, is there? That's not like the dates that the Olympics was first held or something. So actually, I don't think it matters what day Stephen Redgrave is born on. He can have any birthday we like. It's just that the other 3 people also have to follow it. So now it's 365 times as likely. It's no longer 1 in 18 billion. It now goes down to 1 in 48 million. Still incredibly unlikely.
That's all right then.
Yeah, that's still very unlikely. But hang on a minute, there's something else. Because what's special about those particular 4 chosen from the top 10? Surely we would still be having this conversation, and we would be equally surprised if Bradley Wiggins, Laura Kenny, Matthew Pinsent the rower, and Adam Peaty the swimmer all had a shared birthday, because they're also in the top 10 British athletes of all time based on Olympic medals. So surely the odds are going to be less, because we'd still be having this conversation if any quartet chosen from our top 10 had had a shared birthday. Well, how many possible quartets are there? Well, we can do that on our calculators. We can choose 4 people from 10, and that gives us 210 different possible quartets to choose from those top 10. And when you factor that in, it goes down to 1 in 232,000 are the odds of this happening. When we factor in that it could be any birthday that they share, and it could be any quartet within the top 10. It's looking a little bit more manageable, but it's still quite an impressive statistic. So I would now like to appeal to Littlewood's law. So Littlewood's law says that we should expect to see a miracle event, a 1 in a million event, roughly once a month. Okay. How does this work? All right. Let's see where Littlewood comes up with this. So let's suppose, and we just have to go with it here, but I'm going to suggest that while we're awake and alert, which is maybe for 8 hours of the day, because a lot of the time we just sat there not doing much. But at the moment, we're all awake, we're all alert, we're noticing something at the rate of about once a second. Some memory is popping into our heads, or you're noticing something out the window, or you're hearing a noise, or you're smelling something, or you get an itch. Maybe we sense something about once a second. So we sense 60 things a minute. So that makes 3,600 things we sense in an hour. Let's multiply that by 8 to see how many things we notice in a typical day, assuming that we're awake for 8 hours of the day. I'm sticking it in the calculator. That's 28,800 sensations we have, things we notice, things we observe in a typical day. So how many days would it take for us to observe 1 million different things? Well, I'll just do 1 million divided by that. That goes in about 35 days. So once in, let's do it more accurately, 34.7 days. So once in 34.7 days, every 34.7 days, I observe 1 million things. In fact, let's write it that way. In 34.7 days, we're going to notice 1 million things. We're going to have 1 million sensations, be it a memory, or something we see, or something we hear, or something we feel. And therefore, we should expect to see a 1 in a million coincidence at the rate of roughly once a month. Now, these 4 all having the same birthday is only 1 in 232,000. So maybe this is the sort of bizarre coincidence we should expect to see once a month. So miracles aren't as rare as you think. But then a friend of mine at the pub, I was discussing this talk, and she blew it all out of the water with the following arguments. So my good friend Rosalind, who some of you will know if you're mathematicians, said, well, hang on a minute, surely we would be equally surprised if 4 of the top 10 pianists all had the middle name Brenda, or if 4 of the top 10 female vocalists were all married on the same day, or if 4 of the top 10 deputy prime ministers were the same height, or if 4 of the top 10 chess players in the country all weighed exactly the same. And of course we could go on all day making up top 10s, choosing 4 people from them. Why 4? Why not 3 or 5? And having some attribute that they all shared. So it does seem incredibly unlikely, and I still love this statistic, that those 4 amazing athletes share a birthday. But it's not as unlikely as you might think when you think of all the different quartets of special people we could have chosen and all the attributes they could potentially have shared. So, the shared birthdays. Let's have a look at our sceptical checklist. What's the evidence of this phenomenon? Impressive odds, albeit not statistically valid, because we collected the data and then wrote down our hypotheses retrospectively. So it's this thing about if you collect data and go looking for patterns afterwards, you'll probably find some. It's still impressive though. Is it replicable? I don't know. Do we see this in other countries? I would like to find out. I would love to see if top 10 athletes in France or Austria or Germany or anywhere else have shared birthdays. Simon has already suggested a mechanism, which is that they're born in the summer, so as they grow up they have more outdoor activity. Or perhaps there's a bit of hero worship going on. Maybe young Mo Farah finds out he's born on the same day as Stephen Redgrave, and that just gives him the nudge he needs to go from promising to great. And Occam's razor, the only simpler explanation I can come up with is that it's a gigantic coincidence. So I really, really love this phenomenon. Is it true? I'm not sure. I think probably not, but I'd definitely be open to seeing more evidence. What do you think?
I think before we move on to the final puzzle we have for you, we should actually ask the audience, what do you think? Is this true, purely a coincidence, or is there some reason which no one's identified? So those are the 2 options, ladies and gentlemen. Is this true, it's purely a coincidence, or is there some mechanism which we do not understand? Now, take 30 seconds, discuss among yourselves, and then we'll ask what a randomly selected audience of sceptics comes up with. Time starts now.
I love it, a random audience of sceptics.
I know.
It's brilliant, isn't it, that one? I love it.
Yes.
We're going to finish dead on time. This is perfect.
Yeah, we're doing well.
That was the longest one.
There's a
This one's
bicycle.
a bit shorter.
Is it, actually? Yeah, because you haven't got much to say. You have to meet on right.
Right.
Because you've taken the answers on this. If you just stop it and then hand over to me.
Right. You've had your 30 seconds. I'm delighted to see that you don't want to stop. You want to carry on discussing. But what have we decided? Hands up if you think this birthday thing is a giant coincidence. And hands up if you think there might be some phenomena going on here. Oh, it's really persuasive.
Really?
I hate it that I could argue it away. I love that one. Shared birthdays.
I think that's fantastic. So I think you are disproving Hume. You're saying actually it's more likely to be a miracle than that, well, whatever.
It's possible.
You've said something about Hume anyway, but I can't figure out what. Now, we're coming to the tricky one. Mr. Hayth at the back might have a more tricky one, but this is a very tricky one anyway. Now, that is not just any bicycle. That is, ladies and gentlemen, my free bicycle.
Ooh.
I met that bicycle about 5 years ago on one Monday morning when I had spent the whole of a very boring Sunday going around bicycle shops to select the bicycle that I decided to treat myself with. On the Sunday evening, I hadn't yet decided what bicycle to get because I don't like shopping, but I think I'd chosen something. But I told my girlfriend on the phone all about my saga looking for a bicycle, and she was duly sympathetic. Now, I lived very close to other houses, and obviously my thoughts were transferred over whatever medium there was to somebody who lived only about 100 yards from me. Because the next morning, when I went for, this, I tell you, this is absolutely true. I may sound like a Jehovah's Witness, but it really is true. The next morning, I went for my normal morning walk, and there, leaning against a lamppost, with a label attached saying, "Free to anyone who wants it," was, voila, the bicycle. Now, I initially thought, gosh, is this a candid camera? I looked around for the cameras. I discussed it with the passers-by. We agreed that it really was a genuine free gift. I got on that bicycle and rode it away, and it is still my bicycle, and it still just about works. So, was that bicycle a pure chance? Did Littlewood's law mean that, it was just a random amazing event and all the other events in my life haven't been so amazing? I promise you, I have no recollection in all my 21 or so years of having encountered a free bicycle. It's the only time in my life I'd ever been shopping to purchase a bicycle and had a moan to my girlfriend afterwards about what a chore it was to buy a bicycle. Clearly, because I'm a humanist, I wouldn't believe it was a gift from God. I had to believe, and here is I think is it the null hypothesis? You'll correct me if I've got the terminology wrong.
This is the alternative hypothesis.
The alternative hypothesis was that somehow the thought was transferred from my head, or maybe from the telephone, across the ether to the owner of a bicycle. Sir, you have a bicycle, you want to get rid of it? It's been in your shed for years, but somehow the thought comes into your mind, if I take it outside, leave it at the lamppost, by the lamppost at the bottom of the garden, it will be gone. Now, so that is my hypothesis. That I'm sorry, sir, I don't know your name, but John, yes. Right, well, thought transfer occurred to the owner of the bicycle, and in his benevolence, he decided to give it to me, although he didn't actually know my identity. Now, Barney, where do you go with this?
Oh, Simon and your bicycle. Right, so Simon decides he's really desperate for a new bicycle, and then the next day or whatever, one magically appears, as if by magic. All right, let's do this statistically and scientifically. The null hypothesis is that there's nothing going on. This is no more than someone giving a bicycle and you finding it. The alternative, have I got this right? What you're suggesting is that if you wish for something, it increases the chances that the universe will provide it. I want to get this right.
No. I've got a much more definite mechanism. Wishing for something implies I was praying. God, I'm a humanist. I'm not going to pray. I wasn't even wishing. I was merely expressing the information was out there for those who can understand it, that I needed or I was hoping to acquire a bicycle.
Okay, all right. So, some sort of thought transfer, if you will. Maybe something like that. Should we say thought transfer? Does that describe it?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Again, as a mathematician, I'm going to struggle to calculate the odds. So I'm going to appeal to the sceptics checklist again. The checklist is for evidence. So the evidence is anecdotal. It happened once. I've also put it's unverifiable, but I'm happy to strike that. I'm happy to trust you as a good friend, as a reliable chap, that you did not make it up. Your recollection of it may be slightly different from how it actually happened, but let's accept it happened as Simon suggested. So naturally, I want to see if we can repeat this phenomenon. If you think there's a phenomenon going on, we should be able to set up some sort of experiment to see if we can repeat it. It's not going to be easy, but what we could do is find something that you desperately want every Monday, and then in the middle of the week, we ask you, have you found it? Has the universe provided it? But I have to say, it could be a very difficult experiment to run in practice. Not easy. The mechanism. Simon suggests thought transfer. Well, that's easy to put to the test, because as all skeptics know, there are these wonderful things called Zener cards. And the idea is that there's 5 cards and you shuffle them up, and you give them to a person, say me, and I concentrate on them, or actually I'd give them to you because you're the person who can do the thought transfer, and then you concentrate them and try to send me psychically the card that you're looking at, and then I write down which one I think you're transferring to me by thought, and then we can do the maths and see if the cards that you have suggested to me and the ones I write down, do I get it right more often than by chance? So you've suggested a mechanism, we could put that to the test. You don't like the sound of that, do you?
Barney, I really do think you have to have some faith here. No, I just think that Barney probably isn't the sort of chap who's receptive to thought transfer. Only certain types are receptive.
You can choose your partner.
Well, okay, thank you. Yes. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of the person who donated me the bicycle.
Okay. So it only works if it's specifically you and specifically the bicycle person. Okay. It's going to be very difficult to test then. And then we come to Occam's razor. Is there a simpler explanation? Well, I suspect Simon may be suffering from the illusion of causality. This is another well-known psychological phenomenon whereby as humans we tend to think we have more of an influence on the universe than we actually do. So if you say to someone, I've looked at the weather forecast and it's not going to be raining on your wedding. Oh no, I've gone and jinxed it. Then you may be suffering from the illusion of causality, because of course you saying what the weather's going to do can't possibly influence it. Another example is you're watching your favourite sports team on the telly and you're really desperate for them to win. And you just for a moment, you step outside and go to the kitchen to get something from the fridge. And when you come back, the other team scored and you're 1 goal down. And you somehow feel responsible. If I hadn't left the room gone to get that cup of tea, they wouldn't have... I mean, we're laughing, but I know I had this when I was younger. I think we've all experienced this. So my other possible explanation is that this is just a coincidence. And if you enjoyed Simon's coincidence, I would encourage you to visit the Cambridge Coincidences, which have been collected together by Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter, who's an all-round good chap. He's a fellow of Churchill College, Cambridge. He's a member of the Royal Society. And he's invited people to send in their coincidences. And there are pages and pages of them. I'll just read out one. So many parallels, this is called. So I've got this childhood friend who has the same birth date as me, just that she's a year older. Her sister and my brother also share the same birthday, and our dads both have the same first name. In addition, we both had a doll named Lena when we were younger, independently from each other. And we both belong to the LGBTQIA+ community. Can someone explain this? So this seems to me pretty similar to Simon's "it just seems too bizarre to have happened." There's pages and pages of them. Another great website for seemingly weird phenomena is Spurious Correlations. So a correlation happens where there are two variables that change over time that don't seem to be linked, and then just by chance they happen to sort of mirror each other. A really nice example being this one. The red line represents the number of people who drowned by falling into a swimming pool year on year, and the black line represents the number of films Nicolas Cage appeared in that year. And you'll see a very striking correlation that they follow each other. But ultimately, we're going around in circles here. What this comes down to is, with whom does the burden of proof rely? And I think this is the crux of the entire talk. Simon thinks it's thought transfer, but he can't provide any evidence, other than it happened once. I think it's nonsense and that there's no such thing as thought transfer, but I admit I can't provide any evidence either. So who are we to believe? Neither of us have any evidence. Well, it all depends what sort of world you want to live in. On the left is the conclusion that a statistician would currently make. There is not enough evidence to suggest that thought transfer is possible. Now, it's very important. I'm not saying it's nonsense. I'm open-minded. If you can provide more evidence, we'll look at it. If, however, the burden of proof lay with me to prove that it's not a thing, thought transfer, then we would live in a world where statisticians would have to say this: scientists are unable to rule out the possibility of thought transfer. I think that's a dangerous situation for humanity to be in, because it opens the door to all sorts of pseudoscience and crackpot theories. I'll give you one more example, which is a fictional one I made up. Apologies if anyone suffers from wiggly tongue disease. I think I made it up, but let's suppose I've got a friend who eats a lot of green jelly beans, and she has just been diagnosed with a very rare and serious wiggly tongue disease. I might say, it's because she's been eating green jelly beans. So with whom does the burden of proof lie? Me to prove that statement, or with science to prove that it's nonsense? Well, currently we live in this world where statisticians would say there is not enough evidence to suggest that eating green jelly beans causes wiggly tongue disease. But let's see what happens if the burden of proof lies the other way round, and if the burden of proof lies with science has to disprove the link. Then we'd have to see this sort of thing all the time in newspapers. It's possible that eating green jelly beans causes wiggly tongue disease, scientists say. I don't think we want to live in that sort of world. I think we should continue to live in that sort of world, which is the way statistics does it at the moment. So I would suggest it's up to you to prove your thought transfer theory rather than up to me to disprove it. And I think that just about brings us to the end of the talk. I would encourage you to keep an open mind about these things. But unless you've got any final words to say, Simon?
I think I have, actually.
Okay.
What's the secret?
They're very quick. I didn't hear that. Probably I don't want to.
And learn to spell. Always learn to spell.
A sick Nick, yes.
Always gone.
No, all I would suggest is that before Michael Faraday, people knew that the air sparked on certain occasions. They knew about thunder and lightning. Correct me if I'm wrong, there's probably a physicist who knows all about electricity here, but I don't think anyone knew what electricity was. Probably someone had a theory that was deemed to be crackpot. Probably a statistician would say, well, it's nonsense. David Hume would probably said, well, the chance of there being another force is just, that's as likely as it being a miracle, so it's clearly not. I'll just go with Barney, we have to keep an open mind. And as regards where the burden of proof lies, I think that's a very difficult question. With wiggly tongue disease, you might come up with the theory, but if that was the theory you'd come up with, we simply don't know, and you wouldn't have the resources to investigate it, whereas some PhD student would probably have that resources and dive into it to look at it. So the burden of proof, I think the jury's out on that question. I'm not sure myself, but what I do know is we should be sceptical, not cynical. Now that is the, if you're,
yes,
yeah, that is the end of the
David.
talk,
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen. Well, it almost sounds as though you enjoyed that, but or maybe you're just pleased that tea is getting closer. Now, we do have, however, we are going to start Q&A, but I think there is one person I'm going to ask, offered the chance to ask the first question, because he's David Hayth. Mr. Hayth, would you like to ask the first question?
I don't think we've got a roving mic today, so where's Dave? Is he here?
Is he not here?
He was here, but then I wouldn't know there.
Yeah, he was sat next to Paul in those chairs. I don't know.
He might be back. He's gone to get a bike.
Sorry?
He's gone to get a bike.
Well, okay, the suggestion was, but I think we've got to wait for him to come back. So let's ask for other questions. First of all, rather than just asking any questions, does anyone, could you put your hand up if you have a theory you would like to submit to Barney? Oh, okay. Gentleman in the stripy T-shirt. John. Oh. We haven't got a roving mic, I'm afraid. We'll...
Yeah, just speak up, yeah.
I think people are getting rid of bikes all the time, and mostly we don't pay much attention to old bikes unless we have a reason to. If you're looking for a bike, it's not unlikely you'll find one that's been thrown away or given them.
Yeah, so you suggest it's not actually that unusual for people to give away free bikes?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's possible that this happens a lot of the time, we just don't notice it. Of course, if you happen to be looking for a bike, you are going to notice it. So, yeah, I agree. There's an explanation. Right. Don't choose him, he's trouble.
Should we go to Chris?
Oh, yeah.
Because Chris had her hand up.
Yes.
Yeah, I only wanted to know what the writing was under the hands with the curly wire.
Oh, the ERM checklist.
No, on your...
Oh, over here.
Yeah,
Simon was desperate to talk about water divining.
you can do that at another meeting.
Yes.
Well, I know there are several of us here who did attend Bournemouth Sceptics in the pub. Put your hand up if you went to Sceptics in the pub. Was anyone there? Oh, lots of us. Was anyone there for Professor Chris French, who talked about water divining at length? He's a psychologist, and he was kind enough to send me some of the details of his water divining experiments. But to paraphrase, he set up a load of buckets, some of which had water in and some of which didn't, and then he covered them up. And he invited water diviners to come and inspect, see if they were happy with the test. And then they'd leave the room, and Chris would rearrange the buckets so some of them had water and some of them didn't. They all had a box put over the top, and the water diviners would come in and try and use their sticks to work out which ones contain the water. And it's then very easy to do a statistical test to work out if they're able to determine better than guessing. And no one passed the test. And James Randi is another famous skeptic, and he also did a similar test and found no evidence. And I can perhaps post a link to the YouTube with I'll perhaps give it to David if anyone would like to see that. There's a good explanation of how the study works. So if water divining does work, no one's been able to pass the test yet, but it is one of these phenomena that persists.
I was talking to somebody yesterday about that very thing in that talk.
Yeah.
Yesterday.
What are the chances?
What
are the chances? John was talking just yesterday about it.
Let's go to the gentleman in the light blue top, because you had something else to...
Clive.
Hello, Barney. I was talking to my insurance company yesterday, and I haven't had a claim for over 40 years, so I think my premium should be closer to perhaps £10 or £20 rather than a couple of £100, because of my record, where they say it should actually probably be a couple of £1,000 because there's more chance I will have an accident.
Yeah, well, it's the law of averages, isn't it? So Clive says he hasn't had an accident for 40 years, so why isn't his car insurance just 10 quid instead of like a few hundred? Well, of course, the law of averages says if you haven't had an accident in 20 years, the next one's just around the corner. I'm talking nonsense, obviously, but it could be that there's a black turkey event waiting to happen. So a black turkey event happens where when we see white turkeys, a sort of a black swan event. Sorry, we see white swans everywhere, and we assume that all swans are white. And then suddenly you see a black swan, and you think all this past evidence counts for nothing. So perhaps it's a black swan event. You've had no accidents, and the next one's just around the corner.
I also had a theory, I don't know what section it would come under, on Simon's encounter with the bike, that his girlfriend quite possibly have got fed up hearing about him going to Turkey on a bike and planted it there and hid around the corner.
Okay, so the suggestion is that Simon's girlfriend was fed up with him whinging about his bicycle and went out and planted one. Is Simon's girlfriend in the room today?
Well, not that one.
I wonder why.
Now, can we calculate the odds of me finding a girlfriend who is so generous?
Impossible.
Yes.
Shall we go to the lady there?
Oh, but I just need to tell you that I once had a water divining experience. I used to live in a very old barn near Bath. And at the back doors, I took a divining stick, or whatever you call it, and I went outside, and actually, lo and behold, it did actually start rising and rising and rising, which was quite extraordinary. Only when I recounted it to a next door neighbour, and they said, well, actually, there used to be a well right down underneath that spot that you were divining.
So Jackie's had an actual water divining experience. You weren't aware there was a well there, but the rod started quivering anyway. Yeah. So yeah, I think anecdotal evidence is actually really important because it gets us on the first rung of the ladder. And anecdotal evidence such as that gives us an indication as to where we might like to divert our resources when we're researching things. But it hasn't managed to, water divining hasn't got very far up the ladder. It's still sort of around here at the moment.
I'll come back to you, but let's go to Dan, you've been waiting.
Yes, I was once trapped in a village because the buses got cancelled. I was with my partner and we didn't have any way of getting home. And about a minute after we found out about these buses, somebody stopped their car next to us and said, "Do you need help?" And we did. So they offered to give us a lift back, which was very kind of them. And in the car, they told us they owned a crystal ball. And about once a month, they learn from their crystal ball that someone in their local area needs to be rescued. And every time so far, this has happened for several years, every month, they've found someone who needed to be rescued within their abilities to do so. So my null hypothesis is that if you go out looking for someone to rescue, you'll probably find somebody. The alternative hypothesis is that she actually has a real crystal ball and knew that we needed help.
I have no doubt she has a real crystal ball, whether it works or not.
Yes.
So, Dan, I'll give you the address of Cambridge Coincidences so you can send that one in for Professor Spiegelhalter to add to his list.
Kathy.
I just want to go back to the one about, was it Barney? About
Yes.
5 boys. I'm not a geneticist of genetics. I don't understand the linked DNA, not really. Is there any logical evidence of that some people have some sort of, in their body, where they're more likely to have a boy or a girl?
Yeah, so the question is there any evidence from biology that some people are more likely to have a boy or a girl? I did have a look at this very quickly to see if there's a mechanism. You're going to be able to answer this better than I am.
Not really, but I think humans as a whole, and probably other mammals, produce slightly more females than males.
No, it's the opposite, I think.
It's the other way around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Slightly more males are born each year
Yes.
than females.
Yeah.
So statistically,
Yeah, okay, so instead of 50%, it should have been 51% for boys. But there is some evidence that if you have sex earlier in the cycle, it's more likely to produce a boy. I'm not sure why it is, but I believe that's a phenomenon. So it is possible. Perhaps my father likes it early in the month.
Let's bring John in. John, you've got a lot of experience in this area.
No, it wasn't from personal experience, but just when I was in my first year at university studying philosophy, and the guy who taught us logic gave this very example. He had 5, I think it was 5 daughters, and he claimed, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but claimed that the majority of men had equal chances at either, but that a minority of men had a predisposition one way or the other. And so he said that, because he had 5 same sex already, there was a greater chance of his being one of that minority of men.
Yep.
And whether that's true or not, I don't know. But for me, that was a sort of...
I think that's a good anecdote, because I think we've all met people who've had like 5 girls or 5 boys, and we can't help but wonder, are they predetermined to be so? But yeah, there is a way to tell, which is by making them have another 5 children.
A minority of men didn't have a reason.
do you know what they call people who have 5 children? Catholic.
I was going to
It's like the
say.
monarchs who went on to have more and more and more and more children. Lots and lots of them died, so they got a boy.
Yes. Mike, did you have anything to add to this?
Well, I think that the point about when conception takes place, if it's in, say, the first phase of the moon or the last phase of the moon, that will depend upon what sex the child will be. You're talking about, I think.
Oh, I think it was the phase of the mother's body rather than the phase of the moon.
And one other thing I would like to say, all this talk about scientific and rational approaches to things, isn't that all dependent upon our current state of knowledge? As
Yes.
we progress, we may find out that all these things that we're talking about as a coincidence or irrational happenings are in fact quite explicable.
Yes.
You know, in the light of future knowledge.
Yeah, the statistical hypothesis test is one of the crowning achievements of...
At one point, all the sort of myths and legends that we have are explanations, scientific in a kind of way, of what's been going on. You can take Adam and Eve and say, did they ever exist? In a way that doesn't matter. But it was an explanation of how evil came into the world, if you like. So, I mean, it seems to me that a lot of these sort of myths, legends, there is a kind of truth about it. Not necessarily metaphorical, but not necessarily symbolic. But as far as people were concerned in those days, That was how they explained things scientifically. Now we are explaining things, you are putting mathematics on the board and all the rest of it. You know, maybe in, I don't know, 100, 1,000 years' time, there'll be other means of explaining. And what was said here may prove to be something that can be accepted.
It's absolutely vital that we keep an open mind, because if you don't, science will just stop. Yeah.
Okay, now there's lots of people putting their hands up. I've got Sheena and Pat and Roger and Paul. John, did you want to just come back on this particular question, or should we move on to another question? Okay, let's go to Sheena. Sheena.
Oh, thank you. Just coming back to the point of the COVID, were more black people susceptible or not? I thought initially that they were noticing that more black people coming into casualties with COVID, but they worked out eventually it's because, unfortunately for black people, they're more socially disadvantaged and they do work more in the NHS on lower levels and in care homes and they're cleaners and they work in places where there's a lot of people. And that it was a social.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Once a phenomenon is statistically significant, like black people being more likely to catch COVID, we want a mechanism so that, because that backs up the evidence. And various mechanisms were proposed, such as black people are more likely to have particular jobs or to be socially disadvantaged, or possibly that black people absorb less vitamin D from the sunshine. So yeah, the scramble was immediately on to then provide a mechanism to go with the statistics. Yeah.
What was the result? I can't remember.
Oh, it sounds like you know more about it than I do.
Well,
but does anyone know why?
That was the reason, because they were maybe socially disadvantaged and so many black people do work for the NHS and they were getting COVID because they weren't perhaps wearing masks as much right at the beginning as they were later.
If I may, I think this is only from my recollection of reading the media that actually black people didn't have a particular disadvantage except maybe a socioeconomic disadvantage, but people of Asian heritage did have some sort of genetic disadvantage. And I'm happy for anyone to intervene on this to correct me. But I think it is definitely a sort of thing where you are at risk of saying, if you say that any particular race is disadvantaged, you are at risk of people howling at you, even if it is well established. But I think it is actually a genetic issue there for Asian people.
So we have a few possible mechanisms to go with the statistics. Yep.
Let's go to Pat.
I just wanted to sort of explain a bit more about the having 5 sons thing.
Oh, good.
Because you mentioned, when you might have sex in relation to the time of the month of the mother. It's to do with the sperm hanging around a few days before they might encounter an egg. And apparently the female sperm are tougher and hang around longer. So if it's a bigger gap between the ovulation and the sperm being introduced, you're more likely to be female, whereas they come together more. The male sperm might.
Again, it sounds more believable because there's now a mechanism to explain why some people might have lots of sons and no daughters. So yeah, thanks for that explanation. It's that the female sperm tend to hang around longer.
Yeah, they're a bit tougher women. I mean, that's why we genetically have slightly more male, because then parts more of them would die in infancy to then eat things up.
Yeah.
That's what the theory is.
Let's go to Aaron. I know you've been waiting out.
Just on that point, is there a 50-50 chance? Every time there's a new birth, it's 50-50 chance, isn't it, on that one?
Well, I believe it's 51% male and 49% female or something like that.
Just going back to the bike thing, a friend of mine in Birmingham, he put out a microwave in his hallway of his apartment block, and somebody took it. And this week I had a mattress to spare, so I put a notice out, and somebody took that. So if there's 1 million people in the UK every week giving away something free, surely somebody's going to walk past that and say, that's just the thing I need. And the 30 people in Simon's village who walked past that like he didn't want it, and the 31st person Simon, that was the thing he wanted. So it's just a choice.
I'd like to ask Simon why he wants a girl's bike.
I'm sorry?
Why did you want a girl's bike?
Crabs all over, yes.
Is that a girl's
Oh, well, sort of.
Well, it should go across, shouldn't it? The cross
Yeah,
off, it goes...
It's a hybrid bike.
Let's go to Paul.
I've got one for you to work out, please. So,
Oh, no.
I heard that if there's more than 25 people in a room, it's more likely than not that someone will have the same birthday, i.e. that 23rd date that you called out.
Okay, so this is
What struck me
interesting.
as amazing was you called out the 23rd, then the 22nd, then the 21st, and no one had the same birthdays, and that's statistically very unlikely. You get
Ooh, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned this. Surely you're referring to the famous birthday paradox, which is that the chance of two people having... Well, let's take this room. How many people have we got in this room? David, perhaps you could... Oh, what are you doing?
I'll mark them out.
Well, you've got to do it here so they can see.
Oh.
There's a camera.
Don't get this high-tech
Yeah.
stuff.
So while David counts a number of people, how many people do you think there ought to be in a room before it's more likely than not that two of them share a birthday? For instance, is it likely or unlikely that there's a shared birthday somewhere in this room? So, likely. Well, that sounds bizarre, doesn't it? Because there's 365 possible birthdays. Surely you would need around 180 people before there's a chance of a shared birthday?
46.
I don't know. We got
46 people in the room, something like that.
We got 46 people in the room. I would put it to you that I'm about 93% certain that we're going to find a shared birthday in here. Ooh. So my reputation is at stake here.
How long is this going to take then?
It's going to take about 2 minutes because we're going to go around the room. Simon's going to cross off the birthdays. Oh, just put it has to be exactly, because we need to be able to see this.
Oh, okay.
Can we just read out the numbers and not the months? And then,
Hang on.
everyone put their hands up if they have that number.
There, can we all see? Right, it's got to stay exactly there. Right, so if someone yells out your birthday and it is also your birthday, please jump in the air and say, yes, we have a shared birthday. So does anyone object to us knowing your birthdays? Okay, let's go. 20th of March, Simon. Can you cross it off? 20th of March.
9th of March.
9th of March.
Ooh.
3rd of September.
3rd of September.
16 October.
16 October.
15th of December.
15th December.
18th of August.
18th of August. Anyone? 18th of August? No?
24th of October.
24th October, anyone? No.
7th of May.
7th of May. Let's do me as well. I'm June the 9th. Anyone June the 9th? Simon, how about you? When are you?
July the 13th.
July 13th, anyone? David?
14th of May.
14th of May. Any matches? No matches.
21st of August.
21st of August.
15th of June.
15th of June. Anyone 15th of June? Of course, it may not work, but I'm 92% confident. Ooh. I'm getting less confident by the minute. 21st of January.
22nd July.
22nd July.
24th of April.
24th of April. Lynn.
20th of December.
20th of December, anyone? No one born on the 20th of December.
2nd of September.
2nd of September.
1st of March.
1st of March, John. 31st of August. Anyone 31st of August? Let's go to Aaron at the back.
27th October.
27th October. Any matches?
3rd of January.
3rd of January.
My son's back there.
Oh, there you go, it works.
Ooh, no.
Is that Chris hiding under there? 6th of August.
5th of September.
5th of September. Any matches?
21st of May.
21st of May.
30th of October.
30th October.
We've had a coincidence though. We've had the 7th of May, the 14th of May, and the 21st of May. That's quite...
It's a pattern. It's a pattern. Did we have a near miss at the back as well?
29th of October.
Oh, well, let's do that. 29th of October. Anyone?
15th of April.
15th of April.
21st of September.
21st of September.
11th of July.
11th of July. Oh, we have a match! Yay!
21st of July. 21st July?
Maths works!
Let's see if we can just get in one or two more questions before...
Sure.
We're running out of time, folks, so I'm going to... Rather than...
Can we see the maths behind
Yeah, okay, let's see the maths. So it's a lot easier to work out the probability that there is not a shared birthday. So the first person can have whatever birthday they want. There's a chance of, when I asked you what the birthday is, that's the probability that there's no shared birthdays. 365 out of 365. Then I asked the next person, oh, thank you. Then I asked the next person, now, you can't have his birthday or there'd be a match. So there's only a probability of 364 out of 365, ignoring leap years, that there's no shared birthday. Then we come to the next person. There's now 2 birthdays that you've got to avoid. So it's 363 out of 365 that we have no shared birthdays. And so we go on, and so we go on, and so we go on. So if you take 23 terms of that sequence and multiply them all together, then for the first time, it's less than a half, which means that the probability that there is a shared birthday would be 1 minus that, which would for the first time be more than a half. So the critical cut-off point is that once we reach 23 people, it's more likely than not that there's a shared birthday. And the probability of a shared birthday, I think, is 365 pic n over 365 to the power of n, if anyone wants the formula, roughly. Sorry? Leap years. Yeah, well, now we're opening a right can of worms. Ignore.
Yes. I was going to take one more question, because Roger's been waiting. Roger.
I was going to mention about all the answers about the question about black people and COVID, about news being unavailable. But I was saying that when I was a young lad, I had a friend who was born on the 29th of February, as was his sister, as was his mother.
Wow. What are the chances?
Yay.
Wow.
I just did a very rough and quick count up, and it was about 25 or 26 people before you got to me. 1 in 23, it wasn't far out.
So yeah, the maths clearly works.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give our speaker the full round of applause.
Thanks. I know that was good fun.